Hi folks, you're with Tacitus Today. Tacitus Today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the use of third-party activist groups, NGOs or globalist fronts to come into school classrooms. They're not part of the education department, but they might be, but to use third-party external organisations to come in and spread radical lies and propaganda to the students, the school students, as part of the wider globalist social engineering program. Now, there's a little bit of sort of contentious elements here, because if teachers very overtly teach or push radical, controversial theories, there's a chance it could blow back on them. So rather than run those political risks, the more risk-averse school principals or school districts will say, well, I know, we'll just get those third-party organisations to come in so we can say it's not our fault. But these third-party organisations, it's all pre-arranged with Downtown Central Education Department, and they are paid handsomely for spreading this outrageous, vindictive, anti-white, anti-male, anti-capitalist propaganda through the schools. So they might as well be part of the education department. Again, it's all pre-arranged in background. It's sort of covert, I guess, in a number of ways. But all the principal or the teacher has to do is say, hey, can you come in and teach radical theories, push radical theories on my students? And so just so we can pretend we're at arm's length from it. But in reality, the taxpayer dollars are being funneled into it. Now, on top of that, individual teachers can go to these groups and say, look, I'm putting a class together or putting a course together that's not directly approved by the education department, and I want to teach the male students that they're all misogynist and transphobic and evil, fascist, Nazi, far right, white privilege. Yep, we got a course for that, and here's the course material, and here's the reading material, or we can send people in to tell your young white male students how they're all Hitler and that sort of. So it's all covered. They've got the literature, they've got the course material. They even the teachers can even go and take a day off with pay to go and be trained or shown how to teach it by these radical groups. That's how insane it's got, but how also well organized. Now remember, all these groups are, if they're not directly funded by the taxpayer, then they're funded in roundabout ways, such as receiving generous grants or grants from the United Nations, but they're being paid very handsomely for this work. And it almost doesn't matter where the money comes from, but the globalists are making sure they get well paid. If they were volunteers, of course, they wouldn't do it, couldn't afford to do it. Now, I just want to go through the various stages of schools so you get a grasp of how activists. Now, there are some people who are sort of running around at the moment saying that this, the climate activism, race activism, and LGBTQ activism courses that's being pushed and taught in schools is white supremacy, all that sort of stuff. That's sort of this whole thing is new, but no, it's not. It's actually been going on for quite a while. Now, I'll go back to say when I was a kid at school. Now, the only external people that would come in were, I remember every year a policeman would come around and talk about how to, the rules and how to be sensible and responsible in riding your push bike around. Now, this is because quite a few kids were getting squished on the road riding their push bikes. So obviously there was some genuine concern, and the government sent the police officers around, who would have been paid police officers, to come around and talk about how to ride your bike sensibly, the hand signals you would use, and things like that. And I ride a bike now. I made a point, just for fitness, I made a point of getting a bike and doing a lot of bike riding. And that stayed with me. Must have been ingrained, because I'm very particular about doing hand signals, turning that corner or whatever. So So anyway, there was that, and there was a couple of times some guys came around to talk about how it was good and virtuous to plant trees. They had some name, the Association of Tree Planting or something, whatever it was, and they came around, and actually there was a sort of a ceremony where they planted an oak tree somewhere in a nearby park, and we all solemnly went. This is young. We were probably it was in primary school, so we'd have been 10 years old, younger. And they planted this oak tree and talked a bit about oak trees and how how they lasted a long time, and they were used to build ships and all sorts. Anyway, so they had a bit of a talk about that, and so there was tree planting was considered to be a virtuous thing. I agree actually with that. I always wince when I look at areas that are just devastated and every tree's been cut down. It just somehow doesn't sit well with me, but I understand that it has to be done sometimes. That was probably it. I don't recall anything else in primary school. There was a few lay preachers would come around and talk about the Bible. That was fairly sort of low. It was really talking about the parables, the Good Samaritan and Jesus saying he was without sin cast the first stone, and these sorts of things. It was really those sort of stories and talking about their relevance. I mean, they if you want to have a moral compass type guidance, then they're good stories. When they were first put together, they were good stories, then still are in moral compass terms. I mean, they're probably a little corny in some ways, but nonetheless, if you want to give people some sort of guidance as to what good behaviour is, then I think those things are worthwhile. The Good Samaritan is an example. So that was it. So the idea of plying kids with ideology, as in fanatical ideology or contentious ideology, it just didn't happen. Now coming to when my kids were at school, sort of around the same age as I was then, the difference was huge. Feminist propaganda was being pushed heavily at the time, and there were people coming in, these fanatical, Marxist, butch dyke lesbian types were coming in, ideological fanatics were coming in and saying how rape was rampant, and you didn't get any. The teachers, the school didn't come to you for permission here. That they didn't sort of say, "Well, parents, you've got a choice. Do you want your children to participate, this is an approved course, or so." There was nothing. It was just done, whereas with religious instruction, when I was at school, the parents had to agree. And if there was an external speaker, even the policeman talking about how to ride your bike, that still the parents knew about it. You had to go home with a note to your folks to say this is what's happening, and they could have, I suppose they could have objected. I don't know how that would have worked then, but this we got no advice of this. It was just put on there. So all these feminist things were going on, such as rapes, and boys are misogynists, and girls are victims, boys are oppressors, boys should be shamed, and they're guilty, naughty, guilty, fascist, Nazi, misogynist, oppressor, and this sort of stuff. And it was, now fortunately the kids were young enough that it sailed over their heads. I think a lot of it was just too ideological, and so they tried to gin it up by coming out with the most absurd and exaggerated statistic. Did you know that 99% of all women are murdered and raped every day by evil men? That sort of stuff. And so some of the course material, because this was sort of like pre-internet, really, early days of internet. So you just couldn't go online and find out who these people were and what they. So you had to do a bit of digging back in the thing, and not all the teachers agreed with it, and so I was able to get the look at some of the stuff that these radical activists are bringing. Now, the Department of Education who organised this, so the radical activists in the downtown office of the Department of Education had arranged with these radical activists to go and spread this propaganda through the schools and was paying them to do it. They weren't doing it for free. They were being paid, again, by your taxpayer dollars. And it was having effects in various ways in terms of the curriculum. Boys were being constantly reminded of how they were, evil and bad, and they should let girls go out front, and to not do that meant that you're a Nazi. And I actually got to meet one of the advisors to the government who had this view that said, well, boys are naturally more capable, naturally more confident, and naturally higher achieving. So in order to create an equal outcome society, which was their objective, we have to create, we must create equal outcomes. Is it a good thing or a bad thing? Who gives a fuck? It's the Marxist thing, and we want to create equal outcomes. So in order to create these equal outcomes, the thinking was, which is insane when you sort of run it through your own mind here, but the thinking was that if we tell boys they're evil and bad and fascist and Nazi, if we tell them they're bad for long enough, it'll suppress their natural abilities and capabilities and urges and whatever. We'll suppress those enough so that by the time they become adults, artificially hold the boys back, artificially handicap them. By the time they become adults, then the outcomes will be about equal, and girls will be on equal footing with boys. And we, at the same time, we tell girls that you go, girl, you're stunning and brave, and this sort of thing. So she was an advisor to the government on this. Now, I was in a regional parliament house one day. This is going back some years, but around this same time, and I was meeting a politician in there, and he took me into the parliamentary dining room, which was, by the way, a sumptuous affair. And it was quite a busy day, and the only table we could get was right next to the state governor's table, and he was convening a meeting. This is just, it couldn't have been better. He was convening a meeting of lesbian school headmasters or headmistresses who were talking about how to further the feminist lesbian agenda in the schools, and what he could do as the governor to assist them and support them in those endeavours. I mean, holy fuck. Now, why wasn't this front page news at the time? It also, you see things like, I was super supportive of my son was quite a bright kid, so I was super supportive of his scholastic and academic endeavours. And I had the income to do it. If anything he needed, bang, it just appeared. So he got selected for one of these. They had at the time these sort of, well, what were once anyway, merit-based advanced high school for bright kids, and he got picked for that. But then I went to the, as a parent, we went to the ceremony, kind of a ceremony thing, end of, this is going from primary school to high school. And there were 6 kids that were picked from that school, and there were three boys, 3 girls, 3 non-white kids, and 3 white kids. I mean, perfect gender and racial balance. Now, that doesn't happen in the real world. So, there was another kid that I thought was pretty bright, but the others were as I didn't think they were bright at all. And you could see examples of some of their work. And go, holy crap, this is affirmative action bullshit. So I think they picked half of the kids on affirmative action. Like there was this Chinese kid that did quite well. They picked half the kids on affirmative action, half not. Half girls, half boys, half white, half non-white. So it was the perfect equal outcome balance. Obviously affirmative action and artificially contrived. So that was sort of primary school then, where they were pushing. They hadn't quite got to the climate change propaganda, but they were pushing males are violent and vicious rapists. They were pushing that quite hard. Now, I was outraged by this because they weren't relying on facts to do it. In order to push that crap, those lies, well, in order to push that ideological nonsense, they relied heavily on lies. Studies by lesbian, men-hating lesbian butch gender studies academics, studies by them have shown that men are evil. Hitler! And so they bandy this utter bullshit around, stuff that you could shoot to pieces. Now, my query wasn't that why are those radical activists being selected to do this training and teaching and radicalization and probably clearly they're going to push that agenda. You already know that therefore it must be the government must be approving it. And I didn't realize at the time this was sort of the beginnings of the globalist social engineering project. I didn't quite, the penny hadn't quite dropped at that point, but it's clearly what it was. So this was going on, and I was outraged because, well, look, if it is as bad as you say, then you don't need to tell lies. If you have to tell so many lies in order to push the propaganda, then what is your purpose to this? Why are you telling so many lies? And of course, that was the thing. It was, again, part of the globalist social engineering agenda, and it kicked off with gender conflict was their first one. Obviously progressing to other things. Now look at, and this is high school now, look at a kid in high school. This is some friends of ours. He was telling me about, or telling us, about the people they get visiting. They get climate change activists, they get LGBTQ activists, there's Down syndrome activists. There is no limit to the activism. People that are coming in and trying to shame and blame and so on. The rape and the all that stuff still goes on. Now, that all white people are bad, all black and brown people fighting oppression are good. And these are the kids that now think that they're the biggest heroes in the world are Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King, and fucking Gandhi. There's not a single white hero on their radar. None, not even close. All white people are evil and bad, all of them. They're all fascist, Nazi, white supremacist, Hitler! And this is something clearly that the globalist machine wants, and they're pushing and radicalizing. And departments of education all over the Western world are actively participating, with government pushing, actively participating in the crushing, eradication, and the undermining of all white history and the artificial, pumping up of all non-white history. It's insane. But these are things going on. But I just wanted to sort of make it clear this radicalization stuff has been going on for a long time, since early 1990s, early to mid 1990s, around there. That's when I first noticed it. It could have been beforehand, but I think it kicked off about that time. And remember, you get these angry lesbians coming in. Did you know that men commit rape? Rapists, evil Nazi rapists, and they're saying this to 8-year-old boys. Oh, fuck! And everyone knows it's lies. The Department of Education, the government knows it's lies. Most of the teachers know it's lies, but still it gets through. Still it's signed off on, and still these people are handsomely paid. So that's how determined the globalists have been to socially re-engineer the West in so many ways. Today, of course, climate change and other things are the LGBTQ. I mean, every few weeks a climate change activist comes in to give a talk. That's how hard they're pushing climate change. And the teachers are doing, the course material is developed not by the Department of Education, but by activist groups that are funded by the United Nations and the George Soros and so on. The assault on truth is just it's out of control. What can I say? And we see this, of course, in the media and the utterances coming out of the speeches that, fucking moron Biden make and so on. You've been fantastic today at your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.